This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Russia's war on Ukraine. We're going to take a look at mounting fears the Baltics could be Vladimir Putin's next target. Then later, we're going to explore what's next in the anti-abortion fight, even after the High Court overturned Roe v. Wade. More empty store shelves with shortages in the supply chain. You'll see why the chain is so severely broken and why the link may not reconnect anytime soon. But first, our top story. Another major ruling from the United States Supreme Court. This decision limits the rights of the Environmental Protection Agency when it comes to regulating power plant emissions. And it sets precedent for policy decisions with major economic impact. CBN's Brody Carter reports.
Thursday's Supreme Court decision limited the EPA's authority to set standards on greenhouse gas emissions for existing power plants. Democrats call it a major blow to fighting climate change, while conservatives called the decision a victory for the Constitution. In the 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court's conservative majority ruled that only Congress has the power to create sweeping regulations that would limit emissions from existing power plants, and not the Environmental Protection Agency.
What the court said is that EPA way overstepped their bounds here.
In other words, Congress, our legislature, our democratically elected, democratically accountable representatives have to make the major policy decisions for us unless they clearly delegate it to the agencies.
The court didn't take a position on what the correct environmental regulation should be. The justices, however, ruled on who has the authority to make major policy decisions that have a significant economic impact, saying that on such decisions like sweeping government rules, a regulatory agency can't act on its own. It needs specific authorization from Congress. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, said a decision of such magnitude and consequence rests with Congress itself, or an agency acting pursuant to a clear delegation from that representative body. In her dissent, Justice Elena Kagan, joined by the court's two other liberals, argued Congress had given the EPA the authority to act, but instead, the court appoints itself instead of Congress or the expert agency, the decision maker on climate policy. I cannot think of many things more frightening.
They used a law from 1970 that was meant to go after sources of pollution point by point, and instead tried to completely remake the electricity grid of the United States. And the court said, you can't do that absent Congress saying you can.
The case against the EPA's action was brought by West Virginia's Attorney General, representing some 20 Republican states, including coal and mining companies.
A lot of people are going to try to make this into an issue about climate change. This is about ensuring that Congress, not unelected bureaucrats, get to make the major decisions of the day.
The more important part of today's decision is really who decides. So who decides the major questions of economic and political significance in America? And the court got it correct. It's Congress.
The ruling specifically affects the EPA. However, every federal agency will now have to review its regulations more closely, and it is likely to limit bureaucracies from making sweeping new rules that could affect the entire country.
We have not outgrown the Constitution, and especially the Constitution's protection that it is our legislature that makes our laws and not unelected bureaucrats.
Brody Carter, CBN News.
The Supreme Court also ruled the Biden administration can end the Remain in Mexico policy enacted by former President Donald Trump. It allowed the United States to send migrants back to Mexico while they waited for their asylum cases to play out. At Thursday's conclusion of this Supreme Court session, Justice Stephen Breyer officially retired after 27 years on the bench. His former law clerk and the first black woman to serve on the Supreme Court, Kentanji Brown-Jackson, now replaces him.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Jackson's family was there as Chief Justice John Roberts and former Justice Breyer administered the judicial oaths. This is the first time 4 female justices will serve together on the High Court. Pack your patience if you're looking to fly this holiday weekend. There are thousands of flight cancellations and delays. More travelers and fewer airline workers are to blame. Delta's CEO apologized for the delays and cancellations, promising to do better. But some of his pilots are frustrated. They hit the picket lines Thursday, demanding better schedules and better pay.
We've now flown more overtime in the first 6 months of this year than we did in 2018 and 2019 combined. And in those years, those were record years for the airline industry.
One airline estimates it will not return to normal staffing levels until sometime this winter. But TSA says its workers are ready for the increased 4th of July travel, with thousands of workers on standby. I want to turn now to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There are growing fears the Baltics could be Vladimir Putin's next target. One nation warns if Russia attacks, its capital would be wiped off the map. 3 Baltic countries are already appealing for more military might. George Thomas brings us this story from Estonia.
NATO's eastern flank is home to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Like Ukraine, all 3 share borders with Russia.
In our corner of the world, one should always be aware of the threats coming from Russia.
Kaimo Kusk, Estonia's ambassador to Ukraine, telling CBN News that in his mind, Vladimir Putin is at war against freedom in Ukraine and along Russia's borders.
He's afraid of freedom. He really thinks that freedom can be dangerous. And his end goal definitely is to turn Ukraine's path, to take the country piece by piece.
As Moscow continues its onslaught, there are fears the Baltics could be Putin's next military target.
It's foolish to believe that you can talk open discussions on a table with these kind of terrorists.
All 3 countries are part of NATO and the European Union, yet there's unease here in Tallinn, Estonia, that they, like the others, are unprepared to go toe-to-toe with Russia. Estonia's Prime Minister warning recently that her country's historic capital would be wiped off the map if Russia attacked.
Otherwise, being such a tiny country without the support of other countries, that wouldn't last long.
Despite their small sizes, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have helped Ukraine since Russia's war started. Estonia's contribution to the war in Ukraine has been rather significant, given just how tiny this Baltic nation is. It's only about 1.3 million in population. According to the latest numbers from the Ministry of Defense, they've given roughly about $220 to $240 million in humanitarian as well as military assistance, including the highly effective anti-tank Javelin missiles. The 30 members of NATO meeting in Madrid this week, promising to bolster the defense of the Baltics.
We will strengthen our forward defenses. We will enhance our battle groups in the eastern part of the alliance up to brigade levels.
NATO's Secretary General adding that the military alliance will dramatically increase the size of its rapid reaction force from 40,000 to 300,000 troops, all placed on high alert following Russia's invasion.
This constitutes the biggest overhaul of our collective defense and deterrence since the Cold War.
Still, anxiety grows by the day in towns like Krybarta, near Lithuania's border with Russia, as residents see more images of Russia's atrocities in Ukraine.
I feel angry because the war has all people here in Lithuania. It's normal thinking what's happening in Ukraine right now, so just thinking always, we remember always about it.
While French troops recently conducted a military exercise in Estonia, U.S. forces have also been beefing up presence on the continent. There are 100,000 American troops in Europe today, up from 65,000 in mid-February, just before Russia invaded Ukraine.
Putin wanted to weaken the rules-based international order, but instead he galvanized the world by his actions.
But now the question is whether this will be enough to stop Putin from venturing beyond Ukraine's borders. George Thomas, CBN News, Tallinn, Estonia.
Coming up, we explore what's next in the anti-abortion fight, even after the High Court overturned Roe v. Wade.
Too often, we carry baggage from our past.
In Louisiana and Utah, judges have temporarily blocked abortion bans. In South Carolina, a federal court said abortion restrictions would take effect immediately. And voters in California will decide in November whether to guarantee a right to an abortion in their state constitution. These are a few responses so far to a post-Roe v. Wade America. Jennifer Wishon shows us what the ongoing fight for life will look like.
It's now up to the states to decide whether to allow, ban, or restrict abortions, not to mention so-called self-managed abortions women are having in their homes. As has always been the case with this issue, emotions are running high.
We are en route to Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's house.
Protest outside the homes of Supreme Court justices. A California man indicted for attempting to murder Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and outside the court, a battle of wills, both day
Abortion is murder! Abortion is oppression!
And night.
Pack the courts! Pack the courts!
Former First Lady Michelle Obama urging abortion supporters to double down, get even more organized, as pro-life groups like Live Action urge supporters to remain vigilant, warning work to make abortion unthinkable must shift urgently to your local community. Your backyard is where the fight is heading, setting up a patchwork of abortion bans and enhanced access.
Women in almost half the country could see their access to abortion severely limited.
26 states either have or will trigger laws that ban or restrict abortion, with a number of liberal states taking the opposite approach.
Protections for persons receiving and providing productive health care services.
Connecticut is working to expand the pool of people who can perform abortions, and states across the country are digging in. Planned Parenthood, the country's largest abortion provider, plans to boost access at clinics in states where abortion will remain legal, like Colorado and Illinois, two states that border places where abortion will become illegal.
We need to be defending our children, unborn or born. We need to be defending them. We need to be supporting them. We don't need to be killing them.
Some activists say without the protection of Roe, abortionists everywhere will fear legal action.
I think that this will have the kind of chilling effect that doctors just simply will not perform this procedure really under any set of circumstances because they don't want to get dragged into court.
New York's governor has signed a law expanding legal protections for people seeking and performing abortions. For now, there aren't enough votes in the U.S. Senate to make abortion rights the law of the land, although pressure is on from the highest levels.
We have to legislate it. We have to make sure we pass legislation making it a law that is the federal government says this is how it works.
Pro-life activists are oftentimes painted as extremists by the left, yet there is a growing chorus in the Democratic Party to allow abortion without restriction, which is out of touch with most Americans. According to a Wall Street Journal survey, 48% of voters favor banning abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. 43% are opposed. The Guttmacher Institute estimates each year as many as 63,000 abortions are performed after a baby reaches 15 weeks in the womb. There's also a form of abortion growing in popularity that many state lawmakers have yet to address: abortion pills. That's medicine sent to pregnant women for so-called self-managed chemical abortions.
We're seeing these articles pop up over and over again with how to do yourself abortions. These are dangerous.
Today, more than half of all abortions are done by pills. And depending on how laws are written, women could legally take abortion pills in states that ban or severely limit abortion. Since the FDA approved the drug in 2000, at least 26 women have died. Some 500 more faced life-threatening complications. If it wasn't already, abortion has been catapulted to a top issue in state elections across the country. Candidates will now be forced to answer questions about when life begins and whether any restrictions should be placed on abortion. The The question remains, which side of the electorate will be most motivated to show up at the polls? Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Still ahead, empty shelves with no end in sight. See why experts are saying pre-COVID abundance may never return. Empty shelves at stores. Since the pandemic, Americans have been dealing with shortages. Our supply chain is severely broken. One major reason is self-inflicted, and consumers are paying for it. Dale Hurd explains.
Most Americans have never seen empty shelves like this in their lifetime.
Empty, 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 empty.
Empty. Empty. I mean, this parcel is empty.
Look at this. Sold out. Can you believe this stuff?
The empty shelves began during COVID, so many people assumed that after COVID, the supply chain would return to normal. But it hasn't. And that's because of problems in the supply chain that will not be fixed soon. The really bad news is that some of the problems might never be fixed.
One of the most efficient supply chains in history, the one that helped you score those sweet deals from overseas and kept the shelves stocked at your favorite store, that supply chain is probably never coming back.
Both because of how the world has changed and how companies have changed. Craig Fuller, the CEO of FreightWaves, which monitors and analyzes the supply chain, says the well-running supply chain that many of us took for granted, that gave us an economy of superabundance, is basically a memory.
The golden era is probably over.
And it's more than just bottlenecks or a shortage of workers. There are new problems in the pipeline, like U.S.-China trade friction and rising manufacturing costs that have 1/3 of supply chain leaders saying they plan to move manufacturing out of China by next year.
And because of that, there are ramifications for global supply chains. It means that companies are going to have to look or will look outside of China for sourcing product.
Fuller says a big drag on the supply chain is a decision that American companies have made to adopt a new standard called ESG, which stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. Under ESG standards, U.S. companies agree to only get their products from so-called socially and environmentally responsible manufacturers. If a company in China or India is not deemed to be socially or environmentally responsible, the American company must find another source for its product or risk a bad ESG score that has real economic consequences, like losing investors and capital.
If you don't play by our rules, then you're not getting the funding. Banks will be less likely to loan you money for investments or building up infrastructure and all of those things.
Donald Kendall is host of the Heartland Institute's In the Tank podcast and is an expert on ESG.
They construct these series of metrics, this ESG score, where depending on how you check the boxes of all these different metrics, whether it's environmental things, the governance scores, the social metrics and all of that, a company can be punished or rewarded based on them checking off those boxes and not supplying the best products and services.
The traditional bottom line, profits, is no longer the only bottom line. Now there's also ESG.
The problem or the challenge is that if you're going to put that ahead of profits, then you end up having the substantial tax that it takes to do so.
ESG is a big burden on a supply chain struggling to return to normal. Experts say the supply chain will face continuing challenges for decades. At least one of those challenges, ESG, is self-inflicted. And it's consumers who are paying for it. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, a family celebrates a big win that makes it into the Guinness Book of World Records. See this uplifting story when we come back. Welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. Here is a family story celebrating a big win, a Guinness World Record win. Chad Kempo recently set a new record. The dad of quintuplets ran a half marathon. Get this, while he was pushing all 5 of his children in a stroller. While some may say running that far while pushing a handful of children is miraculous, the real miracles in this story are the children. For years, Kempo and his wife struggled with miscarriages. After 2 healthy daughters, the couple learned they were pregnant again, this time with quintuplets. Doctors advised the Kemples to abort the babies, but the couple put their trust in God and carried on with the pregnancy. Chad Kempo now runs races with his children to celebrate their health. You can read this entire story at CBNNews.com. You know the saying, when life hands you lemons, you make lemonade. And that's what the TriStar Academy in Archbald, Pennsylvania is doing. The lemonade sales are going to a very special cause. Classmate Addie Evans, the 8-year-old, is battling a rare form of childhood cancer. She says she had no idea they'd be helping her, but she could not be happier. With that, it is time for your Friday Faithful. I leave you with this thought as we embark upon this 4th of July holiday weekend. Know this, true freedom is only found in a relationship with your Creator. You are a designer's original, and He knows you best. Find your freedom in Him. That's true freedom, and it is His desire that we live freely. With that word, I want you to make this a fantastic Friday, and be sure to have yourself a wonderful holiday weekend. That's going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our news programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online at CBNNews.com. We would love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us at that address right there at the bottom of your screen, newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much for your company. We'll see you right back here next time. Have a fantastic Friday.